The moment my 32-year-old son Bradley looked me dead in the eye at his wife's family barbecue and asked, "How does it feel to be useless, Mom?" While everyone laughed, I knew my days of silent sacrifice were over. His wife Amanda's parents, siblings, and cousins all snickered as he continued his cruel performance. But when I calmly replied, "It feels great, Bradley, because I just stopped paying your rent," and watched his face drain of color while Amanda choked on her drink, screaming, "Rent what rent?" That's when my real story began. I'm Courtney, and looking back now, I can see exactly when I stopped being a mother and became an ATM machine. It started 20 years ago when my husband walked out on us. Bradley was only 12, still believing his father hung the moon, when that man decided his midlife crisis was more important than his family. "Mommy, why isn't Daddy coming home?" Bradley asked that first night, clutching his baseball glove. His father had promised to teach him to pitch that weekend. I worked double shifts at Memorial Hospital, my nursing shoes squeaking down those sterile hallways at 2 in the morning, while most mothers were home sleeping. But sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Bradley needed new school clothes, science fair supplies, soccer cleats that he'd outgrow in 6 months. His father's child support checks arrived sporadically, usually 3 weeks late, and $50 short. While other divorced mothers dated or took weekend trips, I buried myself in night classes, earning my nurse practitioner degree. Every evening after my hospital shift, I'd drive 30 miles to the community college, downing gas station coffee to stay awake through anatomy lectures. Bradley would be at home heating up frozen dinners and finishing homework alone. "Mom, Tyler's family is going to Disney World," he'd announce, sliding a permission slip across our tiny kitchen table. "His dad owns 3 car dealerships." I'd look at my bank account balance, calculate overtime possibilities, and somehow make it work. Bradley attended private school because the public schools in our neighborhood weren't safe. He played travel baseball because sitting on the bench at recreational league wasn't challenging enough. Summer camps, guitar lessons, SAT prep classes. I said yes to everything, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, while he enjoyed restaurant meals with teammates' families. College selection time arrived like a freight train I wasn't prepared for. Bradley had his heart set on Whitmore University, a prestigious private institution where tuition alone cost $45,000 annually. His grades were decent, but not scholarship-worthy. His father contributed exactly nothing to the conversation or the bank account. "Mom, this is my dream school," Bradley pleaded, showing me glossy brochures featuring ivy-covered buildings and smiling students. "Everyone who matters goes to Whitmore." I refinanced my house, depleted my retirement savings, and took out parent loans that would follow me to my grave. Bradley spent 4 years studying business management while I spent 4 years working 70-hour weeks to keep him afloat. He joined a fraternity, took spring break trips to Cancun, and dated sorority girls whose parents owned vacation homes. Graduation day should have been triumphant. Instead, I sat in the crowd wearing a dress from Walmart while other parents discussed their summer homes in the Hamptons. Bradley barely passed his classes, spending more time partying than studying, but he walked across that stage like he'd conquered the world. The real world hit Bradley like cold water. His business degree didn't translate into immediate success, especially when he showed up to interviews hungover and expected corner offices without paying dues. Jobs came and went. Sales positions he quit because the commission structure was unfair, administrative roles he abandoned because they were beneath his education level. Every few months my phone would ring. "Mom, I just need a little help until this next opportunity comes through. 1,000 here for rent, 500 there for car repairs, 300 for professional clothes." I'd transfer the money from my checking account, watching my own bills pile up while Bradley maintained his lifestyle. Then Amanda entered the picture like a perfectly choreographed hurricane. She was beautiful in that polished way that money creates. Salon perfect hair designer handbags, and a confidence that came from never doubting her next meal would appear. Her father owned Henderson Construction, one of the largest building companies in our city. Her mother served on charity boards and hosted garden parties that made the society pages. Bradley was smitten immediately. Finally, here was his ticket to the lifestyle he'd always believed he deserved. Amanda represented everything he'd been reaching for: social status, financial security, and acceptance into circles where his mother's nursing salary couldn't buy admission. The engagement happened fast. Bradley proposed with a ring that cost more than I made in 3 months, though he swore it was an incredible deal from a friend in the jewelry business. I later discovered he'd maxed out 2 credit cards to afford it, but Amanda's Instagram photos of the proposal at an upscale restaurant made him look like a romantic hero. Wedding planning became my second full-time job. Amanda wanted a venue that would impress her family's social circle. The country club reception for 200 guests cost $38,000. The photographer charged $5,000. Amanda's dress cost more than my car. "Courtney, you understand how important this day is for Bradley's future," Amanda explained during one of our planning sessions. She never called me mom, even after I specifically asked her to. "The Hendersons have connections that could really help his career." I emptied my savings account, sold my mother's antique jewelry collection, and borrowed against my house. Bradley needed to start this marriage on equal footing with Amanda's family. How could I let him be embarrassed by having a mother who couldn't afford to give her son a proper wedding? The reception was everything Amanda dreamed of: crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a 7-piece orchestra, and guess who owned more real estate than some small towns? I sat at a table near the kitchen while the Henderson family held court at the head table, accepting congratulations on their daughter's perfect match. That's when I overheard Robert Henderson, Amanda's father, talking to a group of businessmen by the bar. "Bradley's got a good head for finances," he said, swirling his scotch. "Smart boy choosing a career in marketing. At least Amanda won't be a burden since his mother clearly has nothing to offer the marriage." The words hit me like physical blows. Nothing to offer. After 20 years of sacrifice, after giving up everything for my son's happiness, I was invisible. Worse than invisible, I was an embarrassment they had to tolerate. Bradley laughed at his new father-in-law's joke, raising his champagne glass in agreement. My own son, the boy I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, nodding along as they erased my existence from his success story. That night, watching the happy couple drive away in Amanda's BMW toward their honeymoon in Europe, I realized I'd spent 2 decades creating a monster. Bradley had learned to see my sacrifices not as love, but as his birthright. And now he had a new family who shared his view that Courtney the nurse was simply a footnote in their rise to greatness. The wedding debt followed me home like a shadow I couldn't shake. At 62, I should have been planning retirement, not figuring out how to work another decade to pay for my son's fairy tale beginning. But as I stood in my empty house surrounded by wedding planning binders and unpaid bills, I told myself it was worth it. Bradley was happy. Bradley was loved. Bradley had found his place in the world. I had no idea that his happiness was about to become my complete destruction. 6 months after the wedding, the systematic erasure of my existence began in earnest. Bradley and Amanda moved into a stunning downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors. The building had a doorman, a rooftop pool, and parking spaces that cost more monthly than some people's rent. Mom, you should see this place," Bradley gushed during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "Amanda found it through her family's connections. It's exactly the kind of environment where we need to be networking." I was genuinely happy for them. My son deserved nice things, and Amanda clearly had excellent taste. When I offered to bring a housewarming dinner, Bradley hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "That's really sweet, Mom, but we're still getting settled. Maybe in a few weeks?" Those few weeks stretched into 2 months before I finally invited myself over, arriving with a homemade pot roast and fresh bread. Bradley answered the door in expensive casual clothes I'd never seen before, and his smile looked forced around the edges. "Mom, you really didn't need to do this," he said, not moving aside to let me in immediately. Amanda appeared behind him perfectly dressed, even though it was Sunday afternoon. Her smile was the kind models use in advertisements, bright, empty, and calculated for effect. "Courtney, what a surprise," she said, emphasizing my name like it tasted bitter. "Bradley didn't mention you were coming." I held up the covered casserole dish. "I made your favorite, Bradley. The pot roast with those little potatoes you used to beg me to make." Amanda's nose wrinkled slightly. "How thoughtful. Though we're actually on a very specific meal plan right now, our nutritionist has us eating quite differently than we used to." She took the dish from my hands and walked directly to the kitchen, where I watched in horror as she scraped my 4 hours of cooking straight into their garbage disposal. The sound of the motor grinding up my love felt like physical violence. "Amanda's really focused on our health." Bradley explained, not meeting my eyes. "We're both trying to upgrade our lifestyle choices." Upgrade. As if the food that had nourished him for 32 years was somehow substandard now that he lived in a fancy apartment. The social exclusion started subtly. Bradley would mention dinner parties they'd attended, business networking events, cultural outings with Amanda's family. When I asked about joining them sometime, the excuses came swift and practiced. "It's really just a young couples thing, Mom. Amanda's family doesn't really know many people outside their social circle. These business events are pretty boring. You wouldn't enjoy them." But the exclusion wasn't really about my comfort. I discovered this when Amanda posted dozens of photos from a dinner party they'd hosted. Her entire extended family was there, including Robert and Patricia's friends, several couples from their country club, and even Amanda's grandmother, who was easily 75 years old. Bradley stood proudly in these photos, arm around his wife, laughing with people who would never have acknowledged his existence if he hadn't married their daughter. In the captions, Amanda wrote things like, "So grateful for family," and "Bradley fits right in with our crew." Our crew, not their crew plus Bradley. He had been absorbed completely into their world while I remained locked outside. The financial requests started small and came wrapped in reasonable explanations. Bradley called needing $800 for a car repair. "The transmission is making this terrible noise, Mom. Amanda's dad knows a great mechanic, but he's not exactly cheap. You know how it is with European cars." I transferred the money immediately. A week later, Amanda posted photos of a romantic weekend getaway to a mountain resort. The dates matched exactly with when Bradley supposedly had been getting his car repaired. Next came furniture emergencies. Their apartment looked sparse, Bradley explained, and Amanda's family was coming for dinner. Could I help with a dining room set just temporarily until his next promotion came through? I took extra shifts at the hospital, my body aching in places I didn't know could hurt. At 63, pulling 12-hour days left me exhausted for weeks, but I managed to scrape together $3,000 for dining furniture that appeared in Amanda's social media posts as Bradley's surprise gift to me. The lies were becoming more elaborate and more painful. Each time I saw my money transformed into Amanda's gratitude for her thoughtful husband, I felt pieces of myself disappearing. At Amanda's sister's engagement party held at their country club, I experienced humiliation that redefined my understanding of cruelty. Bradley introduced me to people as "my mother the nurse," with the same tone he might have used to say, "my mother the janitor." Not proudly, not warmly, just factually and apologetically. Bradley's so accomplished, one of Patricia's friends commented. Marketing is such a competitive field, but he seems to be doing wonderfully. He really is self-made, Amanda added, sliding her arm through Bradley's. I admire people who build their own success without relying on family money. I stood right there as they rewrote history. Self-made. No family money. I wanted to scream about the college tuition, the wedding costs, the monthly transfers that kept their lifestyle afloat. Instead, I smiled and nodded, playing my assigned role as the proud but irrelevant mother. Amanda began making increasingly pointed comments about my appearance, my car, and my neighborhood. She'd suggest I might want to invest in some nicer clothes when I visited or recommend hair salons that could do something more modern with my look. Bradley's image is so important now, she explained after suggesting I park my 15-year-old sedan around the corner instead of in front of their building. You understand how these things work in business. My colleagues at the hospital started noticing changes in me. I was working excessive hours, losing weight, and snapping at people over small mistakes. When my supervisor asked if everything was okay at home, I lied automatically. Everything's fine. Bradley's doing really well in his career. The truth was becoming something I couldn't even admit to myself. My son was ashamed of me. The woman who had sacrificed everything for his happiness was now an embarrassment he had to manage and hide. The breaking point should have come when Bradley told me I was embarrassing him and needed to stay in my lane. We were at a coffee shop near the hospital, and he'd asked to meet me during my lunch break. Mom, I need you to understand something, he said, leaning forward with the serious expression he'd learned to use in business meetings. Amanda's family has certain expectations. They're not used to dealing with people from different backgrounds. Different backgrounds, as if love and sacrifice belong to a lower class than inherited wealth and social connections. I'm not asking you to change who you are, he continued, but maybe just be more aware of how you present yourself around them. Think before you speak. Consider whether your input is really needed. He was asking me to shrink, to disappear, to become smaller, so his new family wouldn't have to acknowledge that their golden boy came from humble origins. That afternoon, scrolling through Amanda's Instagram during my break, I saw the post that should have ended everything right then. She had uploaded photos of their latest expensive purchases: new furniture, designer clothes, restaurant bills that exceeded my monthly grocery budget. The caption read, "So grateful my husband is self-made. Nothing feels better than success you've earned yourself." Self-made. Earned himself. Every dollar of that success had come from my bank account, my extra shifts, my sacrificed retirement. But in Amanda's world, I had never existed. I closed the app and went back to work, caring for patients who thanked me for small kindnesses, while my own son treated my greatest sacrifices like dirty secrets to be hidden. The humiliation campaign was working exactly as intended. I was being erased from my son's story, replaced by a narrative that made him worthy of Amanda's family's respect. And the most heartbreaking part was watching Bradley embrace this new version of reality where his mother's love was something to overcome rather than celebrate. But every systematic destruction contains the seeds of its own downfall. Amanda and Bradley had gotten so comfortable with their lies that they'd forgotten the most dangerous thing about deception. Eventually, someone always discovers the truth. 3 months before the barbecue that changed everything, I was sitting at my kitchen table organizing my finances for tax season when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, buried in 18 months of bank statements, was a pattern that revealed the true scope of my exploitation. Every month, like clockwork, I'd been transferring exactly $2,400 to Bradley's account. I remembered each transfer. emergency car repairs, unexpected medical bills, furniture purchases, vacation funds. But seeing them lined up chronologically told a different story entirely. January $2,400 for emergency dental work. February $2,400 for car insurance and maintenance. March $2,400 for apartment utilities and groceries. The amounts never varied. Emergency expenses that somehow always totaled exactly the same figure seemed statistically impossible unless they weren't really emergencies at all. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. Bradley had mentioned their apartment address multiple times, usually when bragging about the exclusive downtown location. The building's website listed rental prices for comparable units $2,400 monthly for a one-bedroom loft. The pieces clicked together like bone snapping. Every single month I had been paying their rent while Bradley and Amanda told the world about their financial independence. My hands shook as I dug deeper into public records. Property ownership information was available online through the county assessor's office. The building belonged to Meridian Properties LLC, a management company that specialized in luxury rentals. There was no mortgage listed under Bradley's name, no property ownership whatsoever. I drove to their building that evening after my shift, parking across the street and staring up at the windows I'd been paying for. The doorman nodded to residents as they swiped key cards to enter. A sign in the lobby advertised, "Premium Downtown Living, lease terms available." This wasn't a mortgage payment or an investment property. Bradley and Amanda were renters living in an apartment they couldn't afford, funded entirely by money they'd manipulated from me under false pretenses. The next morning, I called Bradley's previous employer on a hunch that had been gnawing at me. His former supervisor, a woman named Helen, answered my carefully worded questions about reference checks. "I'm sorry, but Bradley's employment terminated 3 months ago," she said professionally. "I can confirm he worked here for 8 months in our marketing department before we had to let him go." 3 months ago. That meant Bradley had been unemployed for a quarter of the year while continuing to take my money and maintain their expensive lifestyle. "May I ask about his performance?" I pressed. Helen's pause spoke volumes. "I can't discuss specifics, but he struggled with punctuality and meeting project deadlines. The position ultimately wasn't a good fit." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, calculating the magnitude of the deception. Bradley left for work every morning in his expensive suits, carrying a briefcase talking about meetings and deadlines. But he hadn't had a job in months. Amanda's social media told the story their lies had created. Post after post celebrated Bradley's business acumen, his promotion potential, his financial responsibility. She'd uploaded photos of him working late at their dining room table, surrounded by papers that I now realized were probably bills and credit card statements. Her captions praised his work ethic. "My hardworking husband burning the midnight oil and so proud of how dedicated Bradley is to his career." The Instagram investigation revealed more uncomfortable truths. Amanda had been posting about their apartment hunt, showing photos of even more expensive places they were considering. "Ready for the next chapter," she'd written. "Bradley's success means we can finally upgrade to something that matches our lifestyle." Upgrade. Using my money to qualify for an even more expensive apartment, while telling her family that Bradley's imaginary career was thriving. I started screenshotting everything: bank transfers, social media posts, employment records, rental property information. The evidence painted a picture of systematic fraud that had been going on for over a year. That weekend, I drove past their building again and noticed something that confirmed my worst suspicions. A for lease sign in the window of a unit 2 floors up from theirs advertised a 2-bedroom apartment for $3,200 monthly. Bradley had mentioned they were thinking about expanding their living situation. Now I understood what that really meant. They wanted me to fund an even more expensive lifestyle while continuing to pretend it was all Bradley's achievement. The manipulation had layers I was still uncovering. Amanda had been telling her family that Bradley received an inheritance from his paternal grandfather, a man who had actually died broke and bitter, leaving nothing but debts. This fictional windfall explained their sudden financial stability to the Henderson family. I pulled Bradley's grandfather's death certificate from my files, a document I'd kept for legal purposes. The estate had been insolvent. There was no inheritance, no trust fund, no financial legacy. Amanda had simply invented a dead man's generosity to explain their lifestyle. The credit card statements I managed to access through an old joint account revealed the true scope of their financial disaster. Bradley had accumulated over $50,000 in debt across 6 different cards. The minimum payments alone exceeded $1,500 monthly. He'd been using credit to buy gifts for Amanda's family, expensive dinners to maintain appearances, and designer clothes to look successful. Every social interaction with the Henderson family was funded by borrowed money that he had no means to repay. Amanda's posts about their self-sufficient lifestyle became grotesque when viewed against the reality. They were drowning in debt, unemployed, and completely dependent on manipulating money from me while publicly celebrating their independence. The most heartbreaking discovery came when I found a group text thread that Bradley had accidentally included me in months earlier. He'd quickly deleted me from the conversation, but not before I saw a message from Amanda. "Make sure your mom sends the usual amount this month. My family is coming for dinner and we need to stock the wine fridge." The usual amount. My monthly sacrifice had become so routine that Amanda referred to it casually like a utility payment or subscription service. I spent that entire weekend documenting everything: screenshots, bank records, employment verification, social media posts, credit reports. The evidence filled 3 manila folders, creating an undeniable timeline of deception that stretched back to their honeymoon. The nursing home comment had been the final insult, but now I understood it was also strategy. Bradley had mentioned that I should start planning for my future in a facility during our last phone conversation. He was already positioning me as a burden who would eventually need expensive care. What he didn't realize was that the money he'd been stealing from me was exactly what I'd been saving for my retirement security. Every month of rent payments meant another month I'd have to work, another delay in the comfortable future I'd earned through decades of sacrifice. But the most devastating discovery wasn't financial, it was emotional. Reading through their social media posts, their casual discussions of my money, their elaborate lies to family and friends, I realized that Bradley didn't see me as his mother anymore. I was a resource to be managed, a problem to be solved, an embarrassment to be hidden. Amanda's family barbecue invitation arrived the next day, delivered through Bradley with his characteristic awkward phrasing. "Amanda's family is having their annual summer barbecue," he said. "They thought it might be nice to include you this time." Include me this time. As if my exclusion from family events had been an oversight rather than intentional social isolation. "That sounds lovely," I replied, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "I'll bring a side dish." "Just something simple, Mom. Nothing too, I knew exactly what he meant. Nothing too homemade, too humble, too reminiscent of the working-class background that Amanda's family pretended didn't exist. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the barbecue would be the perfect setting for the truth to finally surface. Amanda's family would be there in full force, ready to celebrate their daughter's wonderful husband and his impressive success story. They had no idea that every detail of that success story was built on lies I'd been unknowingly funding for 18 months. but they were about to learn along with everyone else who had participated in erasing my existence from my son's achievements. I marked the barbecue date on my calendar with a red pen. After decades of saying yes to every demand, swallowing every insult, and accepting every excuse, I was finally ready to say no. The truth was going to set everyone free whether they wanted freedom or not. The Henderson family estate sprawled across 5 acres of manicured perfection, with a circular driveway that could accommodate 20 cars and landscaping that belonged in architectural magazines. As I pulled my modest sedan past the stone lions guarding their entrance, I felt like David approaching Goliath, except my weapons weren't stones. They were screenshots and bank statements. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple blue blouse and khaki slacks that Amanda couldn't criticize without looking petty. In my purse, I carried a manila folder containing 18 months of evidence, though I hoped I wouldn't need it. Part of me still believed that Bradley might surprise me, that somewhere deep inside the entitled man he'd become my loving son still existed. The backyard setup rivaled small wedding receptions. White tents dotted the lawn, connected by strings of lights that would illuminate the evening festivities. Catering trucks were already delivering food that cost more than most families' weekly grocery budgets. This wasn't a casual barbecue. It was a social event designed to reinforce the Henderson family's position in their community's hierarchy. Amanda greeted guests at the gate leading from the house to the backyard, looking stunning in a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her smile brightened genuinely when she saw Bradley approaching with a bottle of wine that he'd undoubtedly charged to one of his maxed-out credit cards. "Courtney, you made it," Amanda said when she spotted me trailing behind them. Her tone suggested she'd hoped otherwise. "How nice." The guest list read like a directory of the city's business and social elite. Robert Henderson commanded a group near the outdoor bar, regaling local contractors and politicians with stories that always ended with his superior wisdom. Patricia held court under the main tent, surrounded by women whose jewelry could fund small nations. Amanda's siblings, Jessica and Mark, circulated among the guests with the confidence of people who'd never questioned their place in the world. Jessica's husband was a partner at the city's most prestigious law firm. Mark owned a real estate development company that had transformed half the downtown area. And then there was Bradley, my son, moving through these circles like he'd been born into them. He laughed at Robert's stories, complimented Patricia's garden, and discussed business ventures with Mark, as if his own career was thriving instead of non-existent. "Courtney, you remember my mother-in-law, Patricia," Bradley said, guiding me toward the tent where the Henderson matriarch presided over her domain. Patricia Henderson was 70 years old, but maintained the kind of artificial perfection that required significant time and money. Her silver hair was styled in elegant waves, her makeup was professionally applied, and her clothing screamed understated wealth. "Of course, the nurse," Patricia said, extending a manicured hand for the briefest possible handshake. "Bradley was just telling us about your work at the hospital. How admirable that you're still working at your age." Still working at my age, as if employment after 62 was evidence of poor planning rather than financial necessity created by funding my son's lifestyle. "I enjoy staying active," I replied diplomatically. "Healthcare is such a rewarding field." "I'm sure it is," Patricia agreed with the tone people use when discussing hobbies they find incomprehensible. "Though I imagine it must be exhausting. Physical labor at your stage of life seems quite challenging." Physical labor. She'd reduced my 30-year career saving lives to manual labor, something beneath the social standing of people who'd inherited their comfort. The seating arrangements told their own story about my place in this social ecosystem. The adults' table under the main tent was reserved for the Henderson family and their business associates. I was directed to a smaller table near the catering station where I sat with Amanda's teenage cousins and a confused elderly uncle who kept asking where his grandson was. From my exile, I watched Bradley perform the role Amanda's family expected him to play. He discussed market trends he'd read about online name-dropped companies where he'd never worked and accepted praise for achievements that existed only in their collective imagination. Bradley's really making a name for himself in marketing, Robert announced to a group of local business owners. Smart kid knows how to handle money. Amanda picked well. Knows how to handle money. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Bradley couldn't handle money. He could only spend mine while convincing everyone else he'd earned it himself. Amanda played her role perfectly too, the supportive wife whose husband's success reflected her excellent judgment. She showed off photos of their apartment to Patricia's friends, describing the wonderful view and perfect location that Bradley had worked so hard to afford. We're actually looking at upgrading soon, Amanda confided to a group of women who leaned in like she was sharing state secrets. Bradley's career is really taking off, and we want a place that better reflects our success. Upgrading on my dime while claiming it reflected their success. The casual audacity was breathtaking. The afternoon progressed with increasingly elaborate displays of wealth and social positioning. Mark announced his latest real estate acquisition, a historic building he was converting into luxury condos. Jessica discussed her family's upcoming European vacation planned around her husband's law conference in Switzerland. Bradley absorbed these conversations like a sponge, mentally cataloging the lifestyle markers he needed to acquire to truly belong. I could see him calculating costs, planning future requests for money that he'd disguise as emergencies or investments. Around 4 o'clock, Robert Henderson called for everyone's attention. He stood near the outdoor bar, holding a glass of expensive whiskey and wearing the expression of a man accustomed to being heard. I want to thank everyone for joining our family celebration. He began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a successful business from the ground up. It's always wonderful to see how our circle continues to grow with quality people. Quality people. The phrase felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I'm particularly proud of our Amanda's choice in a husband. Robert continued, raising his glass toward Bradley. Young man, you've proven yourself in ways that matter. Financial responsibility, career ambition, the ability to provide for my daughter without relying on handouts. The cruel irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Robert Henderson was praising my son for financial independence that was completely fictional, funded entirely by money Bradley had manipulated from me through elaborate lies. In fact, Robert continued, his audience hanging on every word. I'm so impressed with Bradley's business sense and financial management that I'm considering him for a junior partnership in our new commercial development project. A junior partnership. The Henderson family was about to offer my son a business opportunity based on false credentials I'd unknowingly funded. Bradley would gain access to their professional network, their resources, and their investment capital, all because they believed lies about his financial competence. Bradley's face flushed with pride and excitement. This was everything he'd been working toward, the validation that would cement his place in Amanda's family and social circle. All it had cost was my retirement savings and his relationship with the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his happiness. Thank you, sir, Bradley responded, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you won't regret this opportunity. Won't regret this opportunity. He was making promises based on a foundation of deception that would eventually collapse and destroy everyone involved. But at that moment, surrounded by applause and congratulations, Bradley looked like he believed his own lies. Amanda beamed at her father's announcement, accepting kudos from family and friends about her husband's business acumen. She was genuinely proud, which meant she either didn't know about Bradley's unemployment and debt, or she was a far better actress than I'd given her credit for. As the afternoon moved toward evening, the conversations turned increasingly personal. Robert's business associates shared stories about their children's achievements, their successful marriages, and their family legacies. Bradley contributed to these discussions as if he belonged, as if his success story was as legitimate as theirs. The emotional pain of watching my son embrace this false identity was almost unbearable. Every lie he told, every credit he accepted for achievements that were really mine, drove the knife deeper into my heart. But underneath the pain, something harder was forming. Anger. Pure crystalline fury at being erased from my own son's story while funding the very lifestyle that allowed him to deny my existence. As the sun began to set and the string lights illuminated the gathering, I realized that this barbecue was going to be the last time Bradley used my money to buy acceptance from people who would never have acknowledged him without it. The evidence folder in my purse felt heavier with each lie he told. Soon everyone would discover exactly how Bradley had achieved his impressive financial independence. And when that moment came, I wanted to be standing right here watching the foundation of his new life crumble along with every relationship he'd built on deception. The truth was coming whether Bradley was ready or not. The moment arrived just as the sun was setting and the string lights cast everything in a golden glow that made the evening feel magical and romantic. Robert Henderson had just finished his second announcement about Bradley's business partnership potential when my son decided to entertain the crowd with what he clearly thought was harmless humor at my expense. "You know what I love about family gatherings," Bradley said loudly enough for everyone to hear, gesturing with his wine glass in a way that suggested this wasn't his first drink of the evening. "Everyone gets to see how far they've come in life." The conversation around us quieted as people sensed entertainment approaching. Amanda smiled encouragingly at her husband, probably expecting another charming story that would reinforce his image as the self-made success story they'd all been celebrating. Bradley turned to me with a grin that looked friendly to everyone else, but felt cruel to the woman who'd raised him. "Speaking of which, Mom, I've always been curious about something." My heart started beating faster, but I kept my expression neutral. "What's that, sweetheart?" "How does it feel to be useless?" The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Conversation stopped entirely. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the catering staff seemed to freeze as they processed what they'd just heard. But Bradley wasn't finished. He was warming to his theme, encouraged by the shocked attention his cruelty had generated. "I mean, here you are at 63, still working as a nurse, living in the same tiny house, driving the same beat-up car. Meanwhile, your son has built a real life, a successful career, a beautiful marriage." Patricia Henderson actually gasped, though whether from shock at his boldness or approval of his sentiment, I couldn't tell. Amanda's face showed genuine confusion, as if she wasn't sure whether to laugh or apologize. "Bradley," Amanda said quietly, "maybe that's enough." But Bradley was drunk on his own performance and the attention of people he desperately wanted to impress. No, I think it's important to acknowledge these things. Mom, you've always been so focused on your little nursing job, your small-town mentality. You never understood ambition, never grasped what it takes to really succeed." Robert Henderson nodded approvingly. "Self-reflection is important in families," he said. "Understanding each person's contributions and limitations." The cruelty was breathtaking in its casualness. These people were discussing my life like I was a problem to be analyzed rather than a human being with feelings. But what hurt most was watching my own son orchestrate this humiliation for their entertainment. "So, I'm really curious, Mom." Bradley continued, his voice taking on a mockingly gentle tone. How does it feel to be useless? The laughter that followed wasn't mean-spirited from most of the guests. They seemed uncomfortable, but unwilling to challenge their host's family dynamics. Patricia Henderson, however, laughed genuinely, as if Bradley had made a particularly clever observation. At least she knows her place, Patricia added with a smile that could have cut glass. That's more than you can say for some people. Amanda joined the laughter nervously, probably sensing that she needed to support her husband even if his behavior was making her uncomfortable. Maybe she can learn something about success from watching us, she said, her comment drawing more chuckles from the crowd. I sat there absorbing their mockery, feeling the weight of 18 months of sacrifice being dismissed as worthlessness. Every extra shift I'd worked, every bill I'd delayed paying, every comfort I'd denied myself so Bradley could maintain this lifestyle. All of it reduced to a punchline for their entertainment. Then something inside me shifted. The pain crystallized into something harder and clearer. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, and realized I was done being his victim. You really want to know how it feels, Bradley? I asked, my voice calm and steady despite the fury building inside me. Please enlighten us, he said with a theatrical bow that made Amanda giggle and encouraged more laughter from the audience. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening the banking app I'd been using to transfer money to my son for over a year. The screen showed our transaction history in stark black and white numbers that told a very different story than the one Bradley had been selling. It feels great, I said, clearly making sure my voice carried to every corner of the gathering, because I just stopped paying your rent. The laughter died so abruptly it was like someone had turned off a radio. Bradley's face went from amused to confused to terrified in the span of 3 seconds. The wine glass in his hand trembled slightly as the implications of my words sank in. Rent! Amanda's voice cracked on the word. What rent? She looked genuinely bewildered, her eyes darting between Bradley and me as if we were speaking a foreign language. The confusion on her face was so authentic that I realized she truly didn't know about the monthly transfers. Bradley had been lying to both of us. The $2,400 I transfer to Bradley's account every month? I explained calmly, holding up my phone so the nearest guest could see the screen. The money that pays for your beautiful downtown apartment. That's not possible, Amanda said, her voice rising to near hysteria. Bradley pays our rent from his salary. He has a job in marketing. He goes to work every day. Bradley hasn't had a job for 3 months. I continued, my voice getting stronger with each revelation. He was fired for poor performance and has been pretending to go to work while living entirely on money he manipulates from me. The silence was so complete I could hear traffic from the street beyond the estate's walls. Faces that had been friendly and amused moments before now showed shocked confusion and the beginning of something that looked like disgust. Robert Henderson stepped forward, his businessman's instincts kicking in as he tried to process this information. That can't be accurate, he said firmly. Bradley's financial independence was a key factor in our daughter's decision to marry him. Let me show you the bank transfers, I offered, scrolling through 18 months of evidence on my phone screen. January through June of this year, $2,400 monthly. July and August, the same amount. September, October, November. Every month, the exact amount of your apartment rent. Amanda's breathing became rapid and shallow as she stared at the numbers. Bradley, tell them this isn't true. Tell them you have a job. Tell them you pay our bills. But Bradley's face had gone completely white. He opened his mouth several times without making any sound, like a fish struggling for air. The confidence and charm he'd displayed all afternoon had evaporated completely. Son, Robert Henderson said, his voice taking on the hard edge he probably used in difficult business negotiations. I think you need to explain what's happening here. This is, Bradley stammered, looking around desperately for support that wasn't coming. Mom, you can't do this. You can't just cut me off without warning. Cut you off. I laughed, and the sound surprised even me with its bitter edge. Bradley, you've been lying to me for 18 months. Every emergency, every crisis, every urgent need for money. It was all rent payments that you told your wife were coming from the job you don't have. Amanda's face was transforming as understanding dawned. The woman who'd been laughing at my expense moments earlier now looked like she was going to be sick. The inheritance, she whispered. You said you inherited money from your grandfather. That's how you explained our lifestyle to my family. There was no inheritance, I said gently, almost feeling sorry for her despite everything. Bradley's grandfather died with nothing but debts. I have the estate documents if you'd like to see them. Patricia Henderson's expression shifted from confused to disgusted as she processed the implications. Do you mean to tell me that everything we've been celebrating about this young man's success is built on lies? Mom, please, Bradley begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Don't do this here. We can talk about it privately. Privately, I stood up feeling stronger than I had in months. Like we talked privately about all those emergencies that were really rent payments. Like we talked privately about the job you don't have and the debts you're hiding. Jessica Henderson, Amanda's sister, spoke up for the first time. What debts? I pulled out my second phone screen showing credit reports I'd obtained through our old joint accounts. Over $50,000 across 6 credit cards, minimum payments that exceed $1,500 monthly, all used to maintain the illusion that Bradley belongs in your social circle. The numbers hit the gathering like physical blows. These were people who understood finance, who built businesses and managed investments. They could calculate exactly how unsustainable Bradley's situation was. Mark Henderson. Amanda's brother shook his head in disbelief. $50,000 in consumer debt with no income. That's financial suicide. Which is why the partnership offer is obviously rescinded, Robert said coldly. I don't do business with people who lie about fundamental qualifications. Mr. Henderson, please. Bradley started, but Robert cut him off with a wave. Son, you just spent an afternoon accepting praise for financial management while living entirely on your mother's money and destroying your credit with fraudulent lifestyle purchases. There's nothing more to discuss. Amanda was hyperventilating now, her perfectly styled hair beginning to fall in her face as the reality of her situation crashed over her. My family, my friends, everyone knows about our apartment, our lifestyle. How am I supposed to explain this? You could start with the truth, I suggested mildly. The truth. Amanda's voice hit a pitch that made several guests wince. The truth is that I married a fraud who's been lying to everyone, including me. The truth is that everything I've told my family about my husband is completely false. Patricia Henderson gathered herself with the dignity of someone accustomed to managing social crises. I think it's time for our guests to enjoy the remainder of the evening while our family processes this information privately. It was a dismissal politely worded, but absolutely final. The other guests began drifting away from our corner of the party, probably grateful to escape the emotional carnage they'd just witnessed. But I wasn't finished. For 18 months, I'd watched my money transform into Amanda's social media posts about Bradley's success. For 18 months, I'd worked extra shifts to fund their lies while they erased my contributions from their story. And for the last 2 hours, I'd sat at the children's table while they mocked my sacrifices as worthlessness. There's one more thing you should know, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the evening air. I contacted your landlord yesterday and canceled the automatic payments. Your lease terminates at the end of this month. The impact was immediate and devastating. Amanda let out a sound that was part sob, part scream. Bradley's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he grabbed onto a nearby chair for support. A month. Amanda gasped. We have 30 days to find somewhere to live. You have 30 days to figure out how to live within your actual means, I corrected. I'm changing my phone number, and you're not welcome at my house until you can have an honest conversation about the difference between love and exploitation. As I walked away from the wreckage of their false life, I heard Amanda screaming at Bradley about ruined relationships and social suicide. I heard Robert Henderson explaining to remaining guests that family situations sometimes require difficult decisions. I heard the sound of everything my son had worked to build collapsing under the weight of truth. But I didn't look back. After 20 years of saying yes to every manipulation, funding every lie, and accepting every humiliation, I was finally walking away. The truth had set me free. Whether it would do the same for Bradley and Amanda remained to be seen. The 36 hours following the barbecue revelation unfolded like a controlled demolition, with each subsequent explosion triggered by the last. I learned about most of it through a combination of frantic phone calls, desperate text messages, and social media posts that Amanda forgot to make private in her emotional breakdown. The first call came at 6 a.m. the day after the barbecue. Bradley's voice was raw with exhaustion and something that might have been panic. "Mom, please, we need to talk," he said without any greeting. "Amanda's family has lost their minds. They want a full financial accounting going back to our wedding day." I was drinking coffee in my quiet kitchen, enjoying the first peaceful morning I'd had in months. The silence where my phone usually buzzed with Bradley's latest financial emergency felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. "That seems reasonable," I replied calmly. "Transparency is important in families." "Reasonable." His voice cracked on the word. Mom, Robert Henderson spent yesterday evening making phone calls to his business associates, telling them I'm a fraud. He's destroying my reputation with people I need to network with. The irony was perfect. Bradley had built his reputation on lies funded by my money, and now the truth was dismantling that reputation exactly as thoroughly as the lies had constructed it. "What reputation, Bradley?" I asked gently. "The marketing career that doesn't exist? The financial independence you never had? The self-made success story that's actually the story of your mother working overtime?" Silence stretched between us for several seconds before he tried a different approach. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But destroying my marriage isn't going to fix anything." "I'm not destroying your marriage, sweetheart. I'm just no longer paying for the apartment that was apparently the foundation of it." That afternoon, Amanda's sister Jessica called me directly, which was surprising since we'd never spoken privately before. Her voice was crisp and professional, the tone she probably used in her husband's law firm. "Mrs. Matthews, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the emergency contact list Amanda filled out when they got married." "Not at all, Jessica. How can I help you?" "I want to apologize for yesterday's events," she said carefully. "Our family was completely unaware of Bradley's financial situation. What happened to you was unconscionable." The apology was unexpected and genuinely touching. "Thank you for saying that. I also wanted you to know that Amanda and Bradley are staying with our parents temporarily while they figure out their living situation. Amanda is not handling this well." That was clearly an understatement. Over the next few hours, Amanda's social media presence became a real-time documentary of a complete emotional breakdown. She deleted all the posts about their apartment, their lifestyle, and Bradley's success, leaving gaps in her Instagram feed that looked like missing teeth. Then came the replacement posts, each one more desperate than the last. Sometimes life teaches you that everything you thought you knew was wrong. When people lie to you about fundamental things, it makes you question everything. I'm taking time to process some difficult family news, thanks to everyone who has reached out with support. By evening, she'd made her account completely private, but not before posting a final message that several of my nurse colleagues screenshot and sent to me. I married someone I thought I knew. I'm learning that love isn't enough when it's built on deception. The phone calls that followed revealed the complete scope of the catastrophe. Robert Henderson had indeed spent Sunday evening making calls, but not just to business associates. He'd contacted the apartment building management company, the Country Club, where the Henderson family held memberships, and several social organizations where Amanda and Bradley had been regular attendees. He's basically put out the word that Bradley is financially unreliable and dishonest. Mark Henderson explained when he called Tuesday morning. In our business circles, that's a death sentence. Nobody will work with someone they can't trust with money. The apartment situation was resolving itself in predictable ways. Without my monthly transfers, Bradley and Amanda had exactly $437 in their joint checking account. Their credit cards were maxed out, their savings were non-existent, and their first month's rent at any new place would require deposits they couldn't afford. "We're going to have to move in with my parents," Amanda told me during a sobbing phone call Tuesday evening. "Do you understand how humiliating this is? I'm 30 years old, and I have to move back into my childhood bedroom because my husband has been lying to everyone about everything." "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said, and I genuinely meant it. Amanda had been cruel to me, but she'd also been manipulated by Bradley's lies just as thoroughly as I had been. "Are you, though?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "Because it feels like you planned this whole thing to destroy us." "Amanda, I planned to attend a family barbecue. Your husband chose to publicly humiliate me, and I chose to respond with truth instead of silence. The destruction you're experiencing isn't something I did to you. It's the natural consequence of building a life on lies." The credit card situation was becoming a crisis that would define their next several years. Bradley's attempt to maintain their lifestyle through debt had created a financial hole so deep that even with steady employment, it would take decades to climb out. "I talked to a bankruptcy lawyer today," Bradley admitted during our third phone conversation that week. "He says we're looking at Chapter 7 if I can't find a way to manage the monthly payments." Chapter 7. Bankruptcy. Complete liquidation of assets, public filing of financial incompetence, and a legal declaration that my son had mismanaged his life so thoroughly that the court system needed to intervene. "What does Amanda think about bankruptcy?" I asked. "Amanda thinks about divorce," he said bitterly. "She served me with separation papers yesterday. Apparently her lawyer says she needs to protect her credit from my debt disaster." The separation papers were Amanda's attempt to save herself from the financial wreckage of Bradley's deception. Jessica had recommended her family's divorce attorney, a woman who specialized in protecting people from spouses' financial liabilities. "Amanda's moving forward with legal separation immediately," Jessica explained when she called to update me. "She can't afford to have Bradley's debt become her responsibility, especially since she never knew it existed." The social consequences were spreading through their network like ripples from a stone thrown in a pond. Amanda's friends had started asking questions about the apartment they'd all envied, the lifestyle they'd all admired, and the success story they'd all used as inspiration for their own relationships. Everyone knew something was wrong. Patricia Henderson told me during an unexpected phone call Thursday morning. Bradley never talked about specific work projects, never mentioned colleagues by name, never brought home business materials. We all ignored the signs because Amanda was so happy. Patricia's call was her attempt at repairing the relationship between our families, though the damage was far beyond simple apologies. "I want you to know that our family recognizes what you sacrificed for your son," she said formally. "What happened at our gathering was inexcusable, and I take responsibility for encouraging behavior that was fundamentally cruel. The business partnership offer had been more than rescinded. It had become a cautionary tale that Robert was sharing with other construction company owners. Bradley's name was now associated with financial fraud and deception in exactly the circles where he'd hoped to build his career. Robert's been very thorough in his communications, Mark explained. He wants to make sure no one else gets taken in by Bradley's act. It's probably overkill, but he feels responsible for almost bringing someone untrustworthy into the business community. By Friday, exactly 1 week after the barbecue, Bradley and Amanda's false life had been completely dismantled. Their apartment was boxed and packed. Their social media presence was either deleted or hidden. Their marriage was legally ending, and their financial situation was catastrophic. The final phone call came from Amanda herself, speaking quietly from her childhood bedroom in her parents' house. "I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice hollow but no longer hysterical. "Thank me for what?" "For stopping the lies before I made even bigger mistakes based on them. If you hadn't revealed the truth, I might have gotten pregnant thinking we could afford children. I might have convinced my father to invest in Bradley's fictional business success. I might have spent years building a life that was completely fake." Her gratitude was the most unexpected part of the entire collapse. Amanda had lost her marriage, her independence, her social standing, and her financial security, but she recognized that the truth had ultimately protected her from even worse deceptions. "What will you do now?" I asked. "Learn to live honestly," she said simply. "I got a job at my brother's real estate office. Basic administrative work, but it's real money that I'm actually earning. I'm also going to figure out who I am when I'm not pretending to be someone else." The week of consequences had taught everyone involved the difference between success and the appearance of success. Bradley was facing bankruptcy and social exile. Amanda was starting over at 30 with nothing but the truth and her family's reluctant support. And I was finally free from the financial and emotional manipulation that had defined our relationship for almost 2 years. But the most important consequence was still to come. Because while destruction and collapse were necessary, they weren't sufficient. Real change would require Bradley to confront the person he'd become and decide whether he wanted to spend the rest of his life paying for these mistakes or learning from them. The truth had set us all free from our lies. What we did with that freedom would determine whether this catastrophe became a tragedy or a transformation. 3 months after the barbecue that changed everything, I was sitting in my small backyard garden, reading a book and sipping coffee on a Tuesday morning that I should have been working. For the first time in over 2 years, I'd taken a vacation day just because I wanted one, not because my son needed me to handle some crisis he'd manufactured. The financial freedom was immediate and transformative. With $2,400 monthly freed from Bradley's rent payments, I'd been able to pay off my mortgage completely. The house that had been mortgaged twice to fund my son's lifestyle now belonged to me free and clear. My retirement account, which had been depleted for his wedding and education, was rebuilding faster than I'd thought possible. But the emotional freedom was even more profound. My phone no longer buzzed constantly with Bradley's urgent needs, desperate requests, and elaborate explanations for why someone else's money was the solution to his self-created problems. The silence was initially unsettling. After decades of being needed desperately and constantly, peace felt almost suspicious. The promotion at the hospital came 2 weeks after the barbecue revelation. Dr. Martinez called me into her office and offered me the head nurse practitioner position I'd been qualified for, but too exhausted to pursue. "Courtney, your colleagues have noticed a change in you lately," she said with a smile. "You seem more focused, more confident. You're ready for increased responsibility." What she was seeing was the return of the woman I'd been before I became Bradley's enabler. When you stop pouring all your energy into someone else's dysfunction, you rediscover your own capabilities pretty quickly. The dating development surprised me most of all. Tom Richards was a fellow nurse practitioner who'd been asking me for coffee for almost a year. I'd always declined, telling myself I didn't have time for relationships while managing Bradley's latest crisis. I'm not the same woman I was 6 months ago. I warned him over dinner at a restaurant I could now afford without calculating overtime possibilities. I certainly hope not, he replied with a grin. That woman looked exhausted and stressed. This woman looks like she's figured out something important about life. Tom was right. I had figured out something crucial. Love that requires you to destroy yourself isn't love at all. It's exploitation wearing love's mask. Bradley's downward spiral was swift and brutal, but also necessary. Without my monthly transfers, he couldn't maintain even basic expenses. The studio apartment he rented after losing the downtown loft was in a neighborhood he'd once described as where people go when they've given up on life. The call center job was the only employment he could find with his spotty work history and damaged professional reputation. 8 hours a day of cold calling potential customers for a discount insurance company, earning $11 an hour plus commission he rarely achieved. "Mom, I'm making $400 a week before taxes," he told me during one of our brief phone conversations. "I can't live on this." "Millions of people live on much less, Bradley," I replied calmly. "You'll figure it out." His attempts at reconciliation began immediately and followed a predictable pattern. First came the bargaining phase, promises to change offers to pay me back, elaborate plans for how he'd rebuild his life if I'd just help him one more time. "I've learned my lesson," he assured me repeatedly. "I know I was wrong. I just need a chance to prove I can do better." But proving you can do better requires actually doing better, not asking for help to avoid the consequences of doing worse. Next came the guilt manipulation, his specialty skill refined through years of practice. "Mom, I know I hurt you, but I'm still your son. Family is supposed to forgive family. What would Dad say if he knew you'd abandoned me?" "Your father abandoned both of us when you were 12, I reminded him. "But if he were here, I think he'd say that 20 years of financial support followed by public humiliation might be enough." The anger phase was brief but intense. Bradley accused me of ruining his marriage, destroying his future, and caring more about revenge than family. He claimed that a real mother would help her son during his darkest hour instead of watching him struggle. "A real mother raises her son to be independent and honest," I replied. "I failed at that the first time. I won't make the same mistake twice." When anger failed, he tried the nuclear option, showing up at my workplace. Security escorted him from the hospital twice before I obtained a restraining order that legally required him to maintain distance. "Bradley, I love you enough to let you face the consequences of your choices," I explained to the courthouse clerk while filing the paperwork. "That's not cruelty. That's the only chance he has to become the man he could be." The restraining order was the final boundary I needed to establish. It gave me legal protection from his manipulation while forcing him to confront his problems without access to his preferred solution of using other people's resources. Amanda's transformation was both faster and more complete than her ex-husband's. Working 40 hours a week at her brother's real estate office, she discovered that earning money honestly felt completely different from spending money she hadn't worked for. "It's weird," she told me during an unexpected coffee meeting 6 months after the barbecue. "I bought groceries with my own paycheck last week, and it felt like an accomplishment. I'd never experienced that before." Amanda had also started therapy primarily to process the discovery that her marriage had been built on lies, but also to understand how she'd participated in creating their destructive dynamic. "I enabled Bradley too," she admitted. I wanted to believe his stories about success because they made me feel better about myself. I never asked hard questions because I didn't want to hear difficult answers. The Henderson family's relationship with their daughter was slowly healing through a combination of honest conversations and Amanda's demonstrated commitment to changing her life. Robert and Patricia had been humiliated by the barbecue revelations, but they respected their daughter's efforts to rebuild honestly. My parents are helping with the divorce costs and nothing else, Amanda explained. They want me to learn to support myself completely before they'll consider me truly independent. That approach was working. Amanda had moved from her childhood bedroom into a modest apartment she could afford on her administrative salary. She was taking real estate courses at night, working toward her own license rather than relying on her family's connections. The most surprising call came from Jessica, Amanda's sister, who wanted to discuss her own relationship with money and honesty. Watching Amanda's marriage collapse made me examine my own marriage, Jessica explained. I realized my husband and I have been living beyond our means for years, just in more subtle ways. We're seeing a financial counselor now. Bradley's accountability moment came 8 months after the barbecue, prompted not by my intervention, but by his own recognition that his current path led nowhere he wanted to go. I want to start therapy, he said during our first phone conversation in 3 months. Not to get you to help me financially, but to figure out how I became someone who could treat you the way I did. The therapy sessions were brutal for Bradley, forcing him to confront patterns of entitlement manipulation and denial that he'd been developing since childhood. His therapist, Dr. Williams, specialized in helping adults understand how their coping mechanisms had become their prison bars. I've been living like I was still 12, and you were still responsible for solving my problems, Bradley admitted during one of our careful, supervised phone conversations. I never learned the difference between asking for help and demanding rescue. The insight was accurate but incomplete. Real change requires more than understanding. It demands sustained behavioral transformation that continues long after the insights fade. Bradley's genuine apology came 10 months after the barbecue in the form of a handwritten letter that arrived with no request for money forgiveness or future assistance. Mom, it began. I'm writing this letter not because I expect anything from you, but because you deserve an apology that acknowledges the full scope of what I did to you. I stole from you for 18 months, not just money, but credit for achievements that were yours. I manipulated your love to fund my lies. I publicly humiliated you to impress people whose opinions meant more to me than your feelings. I treated you like an ATM machine instead of the woman who sacrificed everything for my happiness. I can't undo any of this damage. I can't return the money I took or repair the relationship I destroyed. I can only promise that I'm working every day to become someone worthy of the love you gave me, even though I no longer expect to receive it. You deserved a son who protected you, honored you, and made you proud. I became the opposite of that son. I'm sorry for the pain I caused and the years I stole from your happiness. I hope your life is peaceful now. You've earned that peace. Love, Bradley. The letter moved me to tears, but it didn't automatically restore trust. Apologies, however heartfelt, are just words until they're backed by consistent actions over extended time. My conditional forgiveness came with clear boundaries. I agreed to limited contact, one phone conversation monthly supervised by his therapist initially, with any financial discussion strictly forbidden. I would consider rebuilding our relationship gradually, but only if Bradley proved sustained change through his behavior, not his promises. The impact of our story spread beyond our immediate family. Several nurses at the hospital approached me privately to discuss their own situations with financially manipulative adult children. The break room conversations that followed helped multiple families establish healthier boundaries. You gave me permission to say no to my 40-year-old daughter, one colleague explained. I've been funding her drug addiction for 15 years by paying her rent. After hearing your story, I stopped. She's in treatment now. Community support groups for parents of manipulative adult children began meeting monthly in the hospital's conference room. We shared strategies, encouraged accountability, and reminded each other that enabling someone doesn't help them grow. It stunts their development. The life lesson became crystal clear through months of reflection and therapy of my own. Self-worth can't be built on other people's approval, especially when that approval requires you to diminish yourself. Real love sometimes requires saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing people to face the consequences of their choices. 1 year after the barbecue revelation, my life looked completely different. I was debt-free, professionally successful, personally fulfilled, and emotionally healthy. I had genuine friendships, a romantic relationship based on mutual respect, and hobbies I'd rediscovered after decades of neglect. Bradley was slowly rebuilding his life through honest work and genuine self-reflection. He'd been promoted to supervisor at the call center, earned enough to rent a one-bedroom apartment, and started community college classes in accounting. His progress was measured and legitimate, funded entirely by his own efforts. Amanda had earned her real estate license and joined her brother's agency as a full agent. She was dating someone who knew her complete financial history and loved her anyway. Her relationship with her family was stronger than it had been in years. The Henderson family learned to value honesty over appearance, substance over status. Robert had become an advocate for financial transparency in his business dealings. Patricia had joined a support group for mothers whose children had made destructive choices. Our stories intersected occasionally at community events, but the desperate codependency was gone. We were separate people living honest lives, connected by shared history, but not controlled by manufactured emergencies. The emotional satisfaction was profound. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through truth. Everyone involved had faced the consequences of their choices and been given the opportunity to make better ones. Some had embraced that opportunity, others were still deciding. But I had learned the most important lesson of all: you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, and trying to do so will destroy you both. Real love protects itself, so it can continue loving. Real strength says no when necessary. Real family relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-way sacrifice. Now, as I finish this story, I want to ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself giving and giving to someone who only takes justifying their treatment of you as love when it's really exploitation? Have you ever sacrificed your own well-being to enable someone else's dysfunction? If my story resonates with you, please know that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential. Saying no to manipulation isn't cruel, it's honest. And choosing your own happiness after years of funding someone else's lies isn't abandonment, it's self-rescue. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own experiences with setting difficult boundaries, and let's support each other in choosing healthy relationships over convenient ones. If this story helped you think differently about love and boundaries, please hit the like button to help it reach others who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding strength in truth and courage in change. And please share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. May you always have the courage to choose truth over comfort, and may your love be strong enough to include boundaries that protect it. Until next time, Remember that the best gift you can give someone you love is the opportunity to become their best self, even if that means stepping back and letting them figure it out without you. Take care and be well.